Hello, welcome to all of you from LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter. Welcome to Billy Coaching Live. I have the pleasure today to have a wonderful guest, John Sigmon, who will share about leadership in the VUCA world. So welcome, John. I'm so happy
Well,
to have you here.
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is so exciting because we wanted to have this topic, as people know from those who are following. I like to invite leaders to talk about leadership topics, to approach these leadership topics through different perspectives, right? And today we are in the VUCA world. We were before the COVID, before the war in Ukraine, before economical political changes. So we are in a really a deep change also with this new approach to the way of working. Most of us work remotely today. We also learn to work with machines, automation. So all of that is coming at the same time. So I'm really happy that we can dig into this topic today. And so don't hesitate to share your comments and questions. I will integrate them as part of our discussion. So that said, I want to introduce myself briefly for those who don't know me. I'm a professional coach and trainer, passionate about leadership, passionate about high performance, and happy to share my tips, experience, and to interview the leaders, as I said, so that it could be inspiring for you. It could help you in your daily activity. And I want to introduce properly John. Okay, so John is a transformational executive coach. We met because we are both members of ACEC, the Association of Corporate Executive Coaches. I have the pleasure to be the ambassador. So this is how we met, and I want to say, as usual, this is a ritual. Hello, CB. So CB is the founder of this association, and we both share this perspective that we best support leaders and teams in organization by sharing our enterprise-wide business partnership. Okay, so we have both, been at the executive level in organization. We are both coaches and happy to serve you. So don't hesitate to go to the website of the association and to get more information about what we do, either because you want to become a member or you want to access our services. We'll be happy to help you with that. So, and John described himself as a leadership activist who practice deep, intensive, and transformative coaching. So maybe as a starting point, can you share more with us about what this means for you?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. And I am absolutely thrilled to be here with you today to talk about my favorite topic. So, for me, being an activist means that I don't sit around on the sidelines and just sort of wait for things to happen. I am proactive in my life and in my practice in the work that I do and in my community, and am a vocal proponent for what I think is the right direction to move in. So I do that with my clients and with my community. So I take a very active role in the things that I do. And the coaching that I do, I consider to be transformative. So I work a lot with individuals who are striving to get to a leadership position or are in a leadership position and suddenly they wake up one day and ask themselves, is this all there is?
Mhm.
And kind of helping them find fulfillment uh,
Mhm.
and moving forward in that role. So I am just absolutely thrilled to be here. This is VUCA, and change leadership is one of my most favorite topics of all time. So I'm happy to share my experience in that with everyone.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's so enlightening because, leadership is not a place where you struggle, right? You may struggle
Mm,
from time to time. I think you describe it very well that you can be fulfilled in this role, and that's
yeah,
really important. Yeah. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So I think about it in like a lot of us, I think about it
Mhm,
in many ways as a verb. It's leadership is an action word,
mhm,
and that's what it implies, and that's what it means from my
mhm.
perspective.
And maybe it comes to my mind to ask you on the moment, how did you become a coach, right? Did the topic of leadership and this activist transformative approach was incorporated in your personal story? Would you be willing to share that for us?
Sure, absolutely. And I guess what I would say is like many people at certain stages of their career, I sort of never imagined that I would be sitting here as a coach
Mm,
in front of a live audience having a chat with you. I thumbnail sketch version, I started my career many years ago in investment banking. And at the time, I was in investment banking. I thought that was the greatest career in the world. And I could never imagine myself doing anything but that. And what happened was over time, I became more and more curious about other aspects of the professional world. And that sent me off in a variety of different directions. So along the way, I was exposed to coaching. And I'll have to say, at that point in my career, I was not very open to it. And quite honestly, didn't really see a lot of value there. So I fast forward to the last C suite role that I had. And I was in a very, very important meeting around executive compensation one afternoon. And the board was here, I was here. We were engaged in a very robust conversation. And as that conversation is unfolding, I'm thinking to myself, this is going exceedingly well. I'm making some really valid points. I'm listening, I'm responding, all of those wonderful things. When the meeting broke up, I went back to my boss's office and I typically got a little feedback from her. And her response was, that meeting did not go well. And she proceeded to tell me all of the ways that it did not go well. And so in that moment, what I recognized was that how I thought that meeting went was totally and completely different from everyone else's experience. And I shared that story with a friend of mine later that evening because I was just kind of devastated by that.
yeah.
And his suggestion was that I get a coach. And I reluctantly did that. And that experience transformed that part of my career in a very meaningful and profound way. And I decided that when I left my corporate career that I would become a coach myself because I care about leaders getting better. And that's always been my mantra in terms of my own development. How can I continue to get better at what I do? So that's what brought me to coaching.
Thank
That's my coaching story, sort of a
you.
reluctant coach.
Thank you so much for sharing that. If I may, I'm curious about what was the trigger for you to accept to get coach, right? Because you said that you were not really interested by it before. So, and I thought about asking this question because I went through that myself, and I know that most of our clients at some point they go through this question, should I get a coach or not? And I'm not sure. There could be fear, okay, also about what's going to happen if you don't know, about what is coaching. So, what was the trigger for you?
Yeah. I think the trigger for me was the conversation that I
Mhm,
had with my friend later in the evening after the meeting with my CEO. So my CEO had told me, no one else in that meeting thought it went well except you.
mhm,
And when I was sharing that experience with my friend, he knew at that time about my attitude or perspective about coaching. And this is what he said to me. He said, I know that you don't think much of coaching. But if you go back and ask your CEO to give you a coach because you want to become a better leader, and then he stopped. He says, "You do want to become a better leader?" Yes. My response was yes. He said,
Mm,
"Go ask her to give you a coach." And the reason why I trusted him and in that moment was number one, I was able to be a little vulnerable with him and tell him what had happened,
mm,
which was a little different from how I normally approach things at that time. And I was just open to another point. I really wanted to save my career. I really did feel like
mm,
at that point my career was on the brink.
mm,
And when I look back on it, it probably wasn't. I maybe over dramatized it just a bit, but I think that was what motivated me was just that little bit of vulnerability with my friend and his taking advantage of that opportunity to move me in that direction to get a coach. And it
mm,
was the most eye-opening and really wonderful experience I've ever had as a professional from a professional development perspective.
mm. Yeah, what I get from what you share is that at some point you trusted yourself, right? There was a desire and you open, you trust yourself, you can make it happen, right? You could get through a new perspective and, try that, right? Which is also what happened for me, right? Trusting
Yeah,
ourselves that, yes, we can
yeah,
try that even if we don't know yet. We can see things from different perspective. Yes. Yeah. The
I get
willingness to grow. Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
I think what I took away from all of that is, at least for myself, is that I can't do this alone.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
need people around me
Yeah.
to point out, hey, listen,
Mhm.
this didn't go
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and it makes me smile because ego is very present in this decision making, right? So between saying,
Absolutely.
"Yeah, I'm strong, I can make it happen by myself," or thinking, "Yeah, it's actually interesting to reach out to others and get support." So that's wonderful. So I'm gonna share what's coming also as part of the chat, John, so that you can see it as well. Okay, so hello, Oli. Nice to have you here.
Thank
Uh,
you, Holly.
yeah, so we like stories for sure. We can connect with stories. So okay, so now I'm like, okay, so what is the link with VUCA world? Okay, so we share about some uncertainty. We were maybe struggling a little bit, and then we open up to different perspectives. So maybe a nice way to make the link with this VUCA world. So can you share more of your perspective about what is a VUCA world and how can we best approach it?
Yeah, fantastic. So I think that you aptly described it just a bit earlier when you highlighted the fact that in the pandemic has really sharpened our view of VUCA. And I'm going to explain a little bit of give you a little bit more context around that here in just one moment. It might be helpful if I can roll back the clock for just a minute
Yeah,
to explain how we got here. So I
yeah.
have been fascinated with change and how leaders change and the impact of change on individuals and groups for many years. And it started about 15 years ago. I came into an organization that 9 months prior to my arrival had gone through a lot of turmoil. And suffice to say, it was quite dramatic and traumatic for a lot of the people who were at the organization. So the CEO and the CFO were fired. Board members were held accountable. The FBI was involved. It was a big to do. So
Mm,
that was 9 months prior to my arrival. Right after I came on board, the leadership team and I pulled ourselves together and decided we would have a leadership retreat. It was the only time. So, up until that time, no one had ever done that. All of the
mm,
leadership of the organization had never come together for planning, those sorts of things. So, we pulled together a leadership retreat. And at some point during that weekend, right, there was a discussion about what had happened prior. And some people talked about it in very plain spoken way, very methodical, very matter of fact. Other people were very emotional to the point of tears as they recalled what had happened. And I got really, really curious about that. And what I thought I was going to find out was how do people develop resilience through change?
Mm.
And as I started going, so when we came back to the office, and during the normal course of my going around and checking in with people and kind of getting a pulse of the organization, I started asking questions. And here's what came out of that conversation. The bottom line was this: what seemed to make the most difference for the people who demonstrated some resilience and some resolve was their leadership, how their manager behaved in those moments. Conversely, on the other side of the table, it was the same thing. So, on the resilience side, the managers helped people focus on what was in front of them. That was the response I got. Right. So, when I said, what made the difference? They helped us focus on fill in the blank, the mission, the
Mm.
spreadsheets, whatever it was. On the other side of the equation, it was more my manager and our team continued to admire the problem, right? They're sort of mired, they're kind of stuck in a way. And that led me to think a little bit more deeply about VUCA,
Mm.
right? And VUCA, if you're not familiar with it, is a term that really comes out of the US military war college, if you will, right? And it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And it's a way that in the US military war college, they used to describe battlefield conditions. So you can sort of imagine volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. And that language was picked up in the mid 80s or so in management literature. Kind of, if you Google Harvard Business Review, you'll find it. So there has been a lot said about VUCA and a lot of descriptors around what it means and how it impacts people. But there's not been a lot said or done about what to do about it, right? And how to navigate through that. And more importantly, in my mind, how to build stamina so that I can be ready to address VUCA when it comes my way, right?
Yeah.
So that's how I got to this place.
Mhm.
And so what I'd like to do from here is just take a quick little tour through VUCA, break it down just a bit, but spend most of the time talking about what can you do when you're faced with this, and how can I as an individual and help my clients or my team develop the stamina and the resilience they need to navigate through all of this. But before I do that, let me pause because there's a lot of talking from me and see if there's any comments, questions, or discussion.
Yes, sure. So first of all, I think it's really great what you share here because that's also my experience that if you want to move forward and to use what's around you, something you use what you don't control, right? It's about having a clear vision and looking far away. Okay, so not specifically focusing on what's happening now or yeah, focusing on as you said, on the problem, but really looking far away is a way, a very good way. I learned when I was a kid, and my father was saying, "Okay, if you don't want to feel sick in the car, you need to look far away." Okay, straight ahead. Okay, so that's really always what I have in mind is that um, reminding yourself on the overall vision provides confidence, and then you are better placed to use what's around you. Positive, negative doesn't matter, right? Just use what you have, and then you can transform that. So wonderful.
Yeah.
We have actually a question from Todd. Hello,
Hi,
Todd.
Todd.
Great story. So it was related to the previous one. But so he was curious about how it turned out. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
So, yeah. So I think a very fair question. And I think some of it perhaps had to do with fit, if you will. And I'm interpreting that, Todd, as someone's kind of predisposition to be amenable to navigate through that kind of change, those sorts of things. So I
Yeah.
think some of that did have to do with fit, but by and large, it really had to do, I think, mostly with how the leadership of the organization addressed those situations
Mhm.
that came up.
Mhm. Yeah.
So if we were to take just a moment here and break down this acronym so that it makes some
Mhm.
sense to us, and I want to focus on the complexity aspect for just a
Mhm.
moment.
Mhm.
The volatility, sudden, rapid change, uncertainty, unclear information, unclear outcomes, ambiguity, a lack of clarity around the events or the meaning of those events. And I do want to focus on complexity here for just one moment because my natural inclination is to use complexity and complication synonymously, and I want to avoid that piece of things for just a moment. So when I think about something that's complicated, I think about an example of moving from, say, incremental annual budgeting to zero-based budgeting. That's a
Mhm.
complex process. You need to involve a lot of people. You're going to completely change the way that you're doing things. You have an end in mind. Some things may happen that are unforeseen, but largely it's just a complicated process getting from point A to point B. Complexity is a magnitude of difference. We don't clearly know what the outcome is likely to be.
Mhm.
We don't have a lot of prior experience there. There are multiple independent and dependent variables influencing the direction. So, to your point earlier, if you just crystallize the last 2.5 years, you have a perfect example of VUCA. Right?
Yeah.
So, that's sort of the environment that we're living in. And my experience is that the more there's a sense of lack of control around that, the more challenges that brings up for me personally and in the workplace. So, how can you start to address this? So breaking it down into a couple components here, the volatility and the complexity I'm going to suggest are most aptly addressed with narrowing the aperture, narrowing your focus, right? So as an individual, how can I narrow my focus to what's the most important thing in front of me?
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
When my team shows up, right? And it's volatile and it's complex. And they say things like, I would have delivered what you asked for, but Billy over here didn't do what she was supposed to do, right? So when you're faced with circumstances like that, helping the person narrow their field of vision just a bit to what's specifically in front of them. And if you roll back to what I mentioned just a few moments ago from that
Mhm.
personal experience, which clearly has a little bit of bias for me in that, when I went around and asked people what made the difference, that was what I heard. My manager helped me focus on blank, the next procurement, the next meeting, our mission, etc. And actually, I just heard an interview about this current crypto crisis that we're in. And they were interviewing someone who lived through what they call the crypto winter of 2014. And this is what she said. The interviewer asked, what happened? What made the difference for you during all of that turmoil? And this is what she said. Our managers came around and constantly reminded us to focus on the mission. What are we here to do?
Mhm.
And then she said, that made all the difference.
Yeah.
So that has been my experience in sort of
Mm.
the volatility and the complexity piece. So
Mm.
let me just pause there for just a moment because we're going to
Yeah.
segue into uncertainty and ambiguity here in just a moment. But volatility and complexity, narrowing the field of view, what's the next thing that you need to do?
Mhm.
Let me stop there.
That's nice.
What?
Keeping in mind the overall vision and then focus on the next step, right? So that's a good recipe that I have applied for myself um, to really focus your mind on, as you said, what's important, what you can do, what is useful to do. Okay, so as you move this way, you don't get the fear you could get if you look around and you start to get lost, right? You are anchoring yourself on something you
Mm,
can count on.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so part of the experience there could sound like this. Someone comes to you, right, and they're just overwhelmed, sudden change. They don't know the direction. There's no
Mm,
experience there, and they're just overwhelmed. And you ask them, "What is the next thing on your agenda today?"
mm,
What, and the response may be something like, "Well, I need to pull together a meeting with all of my stakeholders."
mm,
So at that point, the idea is to drill them down even further.
mhm,
That may feel like the next thing you need to do, but that may actually still be a little overwhelming. How would you do that? Right? So you may end up with just something as simple as, I just need to make a list of the people who I want to invite. Perfect. Start there.
mhm,
Right. And so just that little bit of clarity can make a bit of a difference.
mm,
Now, if we flip over for just a moment to the uncertainty and the ambiguity side of the house, that's more that's more difficult, I think, for a lot of leaders. Right? That's more of an emotional response. And I know during the pandemic we learned a lot and heard a lot about resilience and empathy. And we also heard a little bit of a false narrative, I think, around empathy overload or something like that. In my estimation, that's rarely possible. Right? So people come to me or you in an organizational environment and they are overwhelmed. They don't know which direction to turn in. They can't seem to make meaning out of the things that are happening to them. That doesn't necessarily require a response or an action from me as a leader as much as it does simply listening to understand where they're coming from and allowing that person the ability to be heard and to be
mm,
seen.
mm,
So just pause here for just a moment and kind of set aside kind of the corporate way of thinking about things for
mm,
just a moment. When I'm overwhelmed, right, and I don't really know which direction to turn in, I'm most often simply looking to vent a little bit,
yeah.
have someone see me, hear me, understand a little bit about what I'm going through. I'm not necessarily looking for an answer.
Mm,
And so, those two elements, noticing the volatility, narrow the aperture, notice the ambiguity, dial up the empathy, right? Asking some questions, etc. So just thinking about it from those couple of perspectives, I think adds a little bit more value than simply describing what the VUCA is. And then what I want to do next is talk a little bit about how we as individuals can build that muscle so that when the next big VUCA event comes around, we'll be better prepared to navigate through that. But let me just pause here again and just
yeah.
see if there are comments, if you have any other thoughts around that that would be helpful for the audience.
Yeah, I just listening to you, it just remind me when I was working in the lab as a scientist. I used to try to make things very efficient, so running different experiments at once, okay, to save time. And for sure, things happen, stop all at the same time, or you have to do something at the same time, so you have only two hands, right? So I used to say, okay, let me pause and reflect, okay? So that was my way. So really stepping out of what's going on and then reflect, zoom out, right? So,
Mm,
and I also believe that in coaching, this is what we do. We offer a safe place where people can vent, and this is very useful for leaders because sometimes they don't have space to share their concerns, their fear, and that's also very important to be listened to and then to okay to release. And I've done that with teams as well, right? In moments where they're in crisis, it's not the moment to try to pretend that you can move forward, right? There are emotions there, and having a time to vent and to release the emotion before you can refocus on what you have to do can be a very useful approach. So I was just thinking about this when after you shared this story. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. So lots of different ways I think to go about that.
Mm.
But again, sort of the overarching vision here is narrowing the aperture,
Mhm.
dialing up the empathy. Now, sort of how to build this muscle,
Mhm.
if you will. Now, uh, I've been the great beneficiary of many great coaches in my life, many great mentors in my life, and a lot of this is not brand new information. So I'm just trying to kind of pull it together in a little bit of a unified framework, if you will. So a lot of us are familiar with the 70-20-10 model for how people develop and learn in the workplace, right? And that 70% of your learning comes from on-the-job experiences, 20% from special projects, and about 10% from formal learning. Now, again, simply a framework doesn't always hold true for every circumstance. So I'm going to introduce another little framework here, individually, and one that you could use with your team, if you're brave enough to do that. And I'm going to steal it from someone, and it's called DNA: diversity, novelty, adversity.
Okay.
So think about yourself in many ways as an athlete, a leadership athlete, right? Putting yourself in diverse circumstances where you can apply the skills that you've learned and developed can be extraordinarily valuable. So if I am using a financial example, if I'm a cost accountant, right, that's my world,
Mhm.
cost accounting, controlling costs, defining what they are, the work breakdown units, all of that. More diversity for me in my portfolio might be expanding a little bit into managerial accounting. All right, so where are some opportunities for me to do that? A little diversity within my framework, right? So if I'm in HR, right, I may be an HR business partner, right? Lots of exposure to the business. Right? Within that framework, more diversity might be becoming more astute at comp and benefits, or more astute at analytics, if you will. So exposing yourself to diversity of experiences within the workforce can help build that muscle for VUCA. Novelty is a little bit different, a little nuanced difference here. This notion actually occurred to me a number of years ago when I was at an HR conference. It was supposedly an HR conference for innovators, if you will. And in the final day of this conference, we were all giving our presentations. And as those were going on, I'm sitting in the audience listening, and people are nodding, and there's lots and lots of positivity. And it occurred to me, we're all just talking to ourselves.
Mm.
There's nothing new here. There's nothing novel here. Where are the CEOs? Where are the research engineers? Where are the other people who might need to hear this or might benefit or
Mhm.
be or find some value in this? And I almost thought in that moment that, we're just looking at our own, we're just navel gazing here. So my advice would be to seek out novel experiences rather than going to SHRM. I hope will forgive me. Rather than going to the SHRM conference, perhaps there are some lessons to be learned from some cultural anthropology conference. I'm just making up something. What is a completely novel and different way to learn about your leadership and how you can get better? And then the final piece of DNA, you have diversity,
Yeah.
novelty,
Yeah.
adversity. Yes, adversity. So this is kind of tough medicine, I think. So so my advice is do not shy away from the things that are extraordinarily hard or seem impossible.
Hmm.
This is where thinking about yourself, if athletics may not work for you, but think about how you've gotten better in any area of your life. And just the mantra that I often use here is there's no learning in the comfort zone, and there's no comfort in the learning zone. So if I am going to learn or train myself to run a 7-minute mile, I better start running faster than 15 minutes a mile.
Mm.
So how am I going to do that? Right. So if I want to get better at navigating through uncertainty and complexity, finding complex, thorny, challenging issues and problems and going there
Mm.
rather than shying away from that is tough, it's hard, it's vulnerable, but it's so worth it. So that's my advice about building the stamina needed. Where can I add diversity into my day-to-day experience? Where can I find leadership lessons from other places besides, for me, coaching?
Mm.
Right? And what are, for me personally, what are the most difficult and challenging clients that I can seek out? Right?
Yes.
If I have a difficult manager or boss,
Mhm.
right, how can I make inroads there? So
Mm.
thinking about it rather than a difficulty, but a challenge or a puzzle to solve.
Mm.
So just again, it's just a shift in perspective
Mhm.
and thinking about your own development in a little bit of a different way.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, that's great. I think, this acronym is very easy to remember and very insightful from my perspective, bringing these three key aspects. And yeah, I mean, this part on adversity is a very interesting one because human beings in general don't like to look for pain, okay? So, it's a little bit like, okay, I know that maybe this is gonna be painful in some ways, but I can, um, again, I think the trust in yourself is key here. Okay, so the learning part, right? So looking for learning, saying, okay, I'm gonna try and I'm gonna try slightly differently until it works. So persistence and trust, I think, is very important to be able to approach this, especially this adversity part. Okay, because like most of us, I believe I was also confronted with situation where it's not easy. You don't know on the moment how to approach things, and that triggers a lot of learning. So it takes courage. Yeah, it takes courage, absolutely. So it's a key leadership trait, right? Because if you stay in your comfort zone, after a while, it's not even anymore a comfort zone, I believe, right? So because you start to get if you don't, my perspective is that if you don't stretch yourself at some point, you start to lose interest or motivation, and so yeah.
Yeah. So I
Sensing
get
the right moment, I think, is very important, right? You don't want to overstretch yourself, right? And
right.
stress yourself. You want to sense, okay, I'm ready for a new perspective or new challenge. On the moment, I'm thinking, how can you sense that's the right moment to challenge yourself? What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. My sense is for me, where that comes in is when I start to feel like it's too much, right? Things are
Mhm.
just kind of spinning out of control a little bit, right? If I can just, again, sort of focus my energy around what is the next thing that I need to do, and also what's hard about what I need to do,
Mhm.
what's difficult, how is
Mhm.
doing this, taking this action
Mhm.
going to grow me, stretch me, or improve me? Now, that all sounds very idealistic sitting here in this moment, right? When the you know what hits the fan, it can be a little bit of a different story. Right?
Mhm.
So, finding a way to pause when things get overwhelming, I find to be really, really useful. And then from there, making a decision. do I want to tackle the hard thing, or is it in this moment simply too exhausting to consider?
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
And my experience is that going about it in that way, it feels very natural, right? It feels like I'm on a growing path. And when everything is kind of spinning out of control, there's a sense of agency that comes with that, right? All of this can still be going on, but right here, I'm okay, right? I know the path in front of me. I know what I need to do next, and I'm moving in that direction. It's not always perfect by any stretch of the imagination. And a little technique that I will often use with my clients or with team members that come to me is simply ask them when they're kind of overwhelmed or they're struggling with something, what is the most difficult thing about what you're dealing with? And I'm often surprised at what comes out of that. So, one thing I would encourage you to do is if you have employees, you have clients that you're working with in a consulting or a coaching environment, and they're struggling with something, just ask them to pause for a moment and give them that question.
Mm.
What's the most difficult thing about what you're experiencing right now?
Yeah, I like the question. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Yeah.
Focusing,
And
reflecting, pausing. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think oftentimes what comes out of that, or when I ask myself
Mm.
that question and what comes out of that often surprises me.
Mm.
So I think that kind of going in that direction oftentimes feels scary in
Mm.
some ways, but I think at the end of it, it
Mm.
often you look back and it's often a lot more enlightening and instructive than I imagined it would be.
Mm. Okay, wonderful. That's great. I'm taking notes about that, and I want to reflect on this specific question for myself, for my clients as well. So thank you for
Yeah,
that.
you're welcome.
Yeah, we are learning here. Yeah,
Me too.
absolutely. Yeah. Wow. So I'm looking at the clock now and I'm like, wow, the time went very, very quickly.
It always
So
does.
yeah, maybe what I could ask you at this stage is, would you be willing to share with us maybe your key project or priorities for the year and how we can best reach to you if we want to join
Sure.
you in
Yeah,
this?
absolutely. So the the best and easiest place to reach out to me and connect with me is on LinkedIn.
Mhm.
I accept all the connections. So please just reach out to me and connect with me. You can connect with me by email through that platform. Would be wonderful.
Mhm.
And for the remainder of this year, I'm focused on a few different things.
Mm.
Um, I have a few projects that I'm working on. I am hopeful that I will be well into a book that I kind of have up here right now and partially on paper that I'm working on. And I have a number of really, really fascinating, wonderful, and beautiful clients that I'm working with through the remainder of this year, helping them go to where they want to go with their own leadership. In addition to that, sort of starting a new committee with the Association for Corporate Executive Coaches. And so I'm really excited about that, trying to generate a little bit more buzz within the HR community there. So, and then in a few weeks, I'll be picking up my teaching with the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, talking about talent and leadership development. So lots of exciting things happening on my agenda for the remainder of this year.
Wonderful. Okay, nice. So thank you so much again for joining us today and sharing these great stories and insights. Um, and thank you to all of you who were there listening to us. You can also listen to the recordings and continue to comment and ask your question, reach to me or to John and
Please.
share, key learnings and what you would like to be discussed in this space for ourselves. Summer is coming, So on my side, I will disconnect a little bit in July and August, and I will have the pleasure to come back with other interviews and activities also in September. So I wish you all a great summer, relax, pause, reflect, and be able to refocus for a good start in September. I think we all need that. So wishing you a great time there. Thank you again, John.
Thank you.
We'll talk soon, all of us. Yeah. Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.